Coming up today here on the Raiders Report, we're going to be looking at some 2025 cut candidates for the Las Vegas Raiders before NFL free agency. I'm Mitchell Renz. You're watching the Raiders Report, and I don't like doing this show because when you follow the team as closely as I do, just like a lot of y'all out there, you kind of get to know some of these players. So it stinks moving on from some names. Don't get me wrong, I can't wait to cut a few, but there's definitely a few names in here that business is business, but that's how this thing goes. The NFL is a business. This is a business type of show, and if you believe that nobody is above the shield, I love Raider Nation. I love the silver and black, and I rock with these players, and we always say once a Raider, always a Raider. But at the same time, you got to make difficult decisions throughout your life, and I'm going to be making a few today. So just know, these are business decisions. Hit that subscribe button if you agree with everything that I just said there. So NFL free agency starts March 12th, 4 p.m. Eastern time. You're also going to see a 48-hour legal tampering period, which is like when some of the reports start leaking out that this player is going to go here, this guy's going to go here. And then when free agency starts, it is the whole officially official thing. So all the players that you are going to see coming up here on the show are based on how much money their salary cap would have been if the Raiders would keep them on this roster. Because as it stands right now, you got $92.5 million in salary cap space, second most in the NFL. And I could sit up here and I could cut many, many players in terms of sake of time and just the most important dudes that could be cut. I'm going to sit up here and I'm going to talk about the top 6 players that if I was in a room with Tom Brady, John Spytek, and Pete Carroll, and we just needed to be able to free up a little bit of space to be able to put a cherry on top or two, maybe some sprinkles on a Sunday when we go out and sign a few free agents. That's why we're talking about the 6 names that you're going to see. And everybody knew the moment you clicked on this video that the Raiders were going to move on from Gardner Minshew. And I mean, when the Raiders went out and they signed Minshew last offseason, a lot of us sat up here and we were like, 2 years, $25 million. It just simply didn't make any sense. You could see this organization try to trade Minshew before just outright cutting him. I don't really think anybody's going to trade for Gardner Minshew. That's like me sitting here going, well, I could be traded to an NFL team this offseason. I don't think anyone's going to trade for me. When you look at Minshew's cap hit, it's at $14 million. There is not a single NFL team that wants to pay Gardner Minshew even close to that. If a team were to make a deal for Minshew, they would owe him $11 million. But let's just face the facts here. When you look at how much money the Raiders could save pre-cutting him June 1st and how much money the Raiders could designate cutting him on June 1st after that, if I'm up here and I look at the entire product of Gardner Minshew, I am simply just going to cut Minshew post-June 1st. And this is something that you're allowed to do only a handful of times, only 2 times, in fact. But the numbers last season were bad. And Minshew, I feel bad for him because he got put in a really bad situation with Luke Getsy, with an offensive line that was a joke, with no running game, with a bad head coach. I mean, there was a lot of things. Now, don't get me wrong. Minshew was a big, big part of a lot of the things that this team did not do well. The Raiders should have started Aiden O'Connell. That was definitely something that I was wrong on. There was something that the Raiders themselves were wrong on. But now 2025 is about making right and going forward and putting the best product on the field. Let's face the facts. You're not going to keep Gardner Minshew on this team. This is important to note, and I kind of mentioned it there a few seconds ago. The NFL teams, they can designate 2 players as post-June 1st cut candidates. So essentially what that means is the Raiders are going to designate Minshew as a post-June 1st cut. He can sign wherever he wants in the month of March during free agency. And then when June 1st hits, the Raiders are going to add that money. It's about $9 million to their salary cap. So you don't get it right away, but I think it's smart when some teams do that because when you look at a team like the Raiders that have 10 total draft picks, you can use that $9 million or whatever the hell you're saving from Minshew, and you can use that to pay a lot of your draft prospects. Let's go to the next player here that I think will be a cut candidate for Las Vegas this offseason. It's cornerback Jack Jones. And even though Nate Hobbs is a free agent, even though we got a lot of players in the secondary, Marcus Epps, Isaiah Polamau, free agents, and I know that there's safeties, and his cap hit is $3.3 million. The only reason to me why the Raiders brought in Jones was because of Jones's relationship with Antonio Pierce back in their days in high school, right? And he was great last season. Jones was a really solid outside corner in the year of 2023. Unfortunately for Jones and unfortunately for the Raiders, if you smell hard enough, you can still smell the burnt toast left by Jack Jones, because this guy was getting burnt left and right in his final year here for the Raiders. And I say final year because I do. I think it's going to be his last year. If you tell me right now I can cut Jack Jones and save $3.3 million and I don't got to eat anything, I'm going to do that. I'm also trying to build a better locker room culture where, again, Jones, based on some of the things that I've heard, is more of a me guy. And that's just based on the stuff that I have heard. So when you consider the fact that Jones took a step back and realistically was the Raiders' worst cornerback last season, anybody telling you otherwise, I don't know if I would trust them to watch tape. But out of the corners that played decent amount of reps, Jack Jones was probably the worst corner that we had last season. So be honest with me down below. It's going to be the pinned comment here on today's episode. Do you want the Raiders to cut Jack Jones? Give me a yes. Give me a no. My answer is going to be here after this YouTube ad break. Obviously, I'm going to sit up here and say, yes, it's time to move on from Jones. Now, I don't want to just outright cut him and we don't try to go out and find a replacement or an upgrade. You're going to be able to go out and find an upgrade. I don't think it's going to be that difficult in order to do it. And the numbers, again, they prove that. Jones was one of those dudes that was swaggy player, and I said last season, if I saw a Raiders fan rocking an 18 jersey, that's somebody that I want to go have a beer with. Now, you're walking around with an 18 jersey going, man, I should have cashed that bad boy in for a Brandon Jasper jersey. And overall, 53.9 PFF grade. The run defense grade, the cover grade, really the ones that I care about. Yeah, he was able to get a sack or two getting after the quarterback, and he's a good athlete. We know that. But at the end of the day, if I'm going to pay a corner, I need him to be able to cover, and I need to be able to stop the run. And Jack Jones, I'm sorry, is not built to do either of those things right now. Let's go to another name here coming up on the show for our Raiders cut candidates. But you know what? I got to give a shout out to our sponsor before I get into our other four names on today's show. Huge shout out to Zbiotics. It's not a secret. We like to have a good time here on this show, and I know a bunch of y'all like to have a good time, but I also think it's smart to take care of ourselves. So let's face it, after a night with drinks, I don't bounce back the next day like I used to, and I got to make a choice. I can either have a great night or a great next day. That is until I found Zbiotics Pre-Alcohol. Pre-Alcohol is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to drink this probiotic before drinking alcohol. Drink responsibly and get a good night's sleep to feel your best tomorrow. So stay in the loop. Go to zbiotics.com/chatsports. You can also scan the QR code on the screen right now to get 15% off your first order when you use Chat Sports at checkout. You can also sign up for a subscription using my code so you can stay prepared no matter the time or occasion. Zbiotics is backed with 100% money back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund you your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/chatsports and use the code CHATSPORTS, that's CHATSPORTS at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Zbiotics, for sponsoring this episode and keeping the good times rolling here on the Raiders Report. Let's go to my next cut candidate on this show. It's Zamir White. Last season, going into the year, we were talking about how big Zamir White's arms were and how jacked he was and how he's looking like a Hulk. I mean, his nickname is Zeus, but I can't call him Zeus because there was nothing shocking about what he did this season. Zamir White got a cap hit at $1.29 million. Yes, the Raiders are losing Alexander Madison. Yes, the Raiders are losing Amir Abdullah. But to me, this is going to have to be a new regime, and I need a running back that I have confidence in. I need a running back that I believe in. I need a running back that I know is not going to put the ball on the ground. And one of the biggest Achilles heels that Zeus has had, unfortunately, in his young career is he's putting the ball on the ground. He's also running blindly. You can tell he's so afraid. The way he's holding on to that rock, it's just different. I mean, the way he looked in those final 5 games of 2023, that looked like a running back that you might be able to say, hey, this guy could be somebody legit going forward. The problem is, last season he averaged only 2.8 yards per carry, was worse than Madison, was worse than Amir Abdullah. You make an argument, and again, was one of the worst running backs that started in the NFL last season. So at the end of the day, I don't always like saying this type of stuff because I get how hard it is to be in the league. And I know Zamir White is actually an extremely, extremely hard worker. But it's time to move on from Zamir White. I want the Raiders to draft a running back. I think you might even be able to go out and sign a guy. Hell, I would want to see some Sincere McCormick get a little bit of extra reps in there. If you told me I can only bring back one again, Sincere McCormick, Zamir White basically making the exact same amount of money, would you rather bring back Sincere McCormick or would I rather bring back Zamir White? I think 90% of the people watching the show right now are going to say Sincere McCormick. So if it's time to move on from Zamir White, make sure you click that like button. Let's go to another name here, and it is Thayer Munford. And this is one of those where, I'll be real, I don't really want to cut Thayer Munford. And I say that because I would at first see if we could trade him into the draft. Instead of giving away a 7th-round pick in 2026, can I trade away Munford instead to just get a deal done? He's got a $1.12 million cap hit. You can see the dead money. It's not a lot. You save a little bit over $1 million. And when I look at that million, and I go, how can I invest it? Well, it's about how much it costs to go out and get somebody on the vet min. I would look to see if I can add somebody on the vet min that would be able to help me out right away. Also, you got to remember that Munford is not a part of this regime, and Munford already got replaced by DJ Glaze, and man, oh man, did he struggle last season in 201 snaps, a 45.9 overall PFF grade. He struggled in pass blocking. He struggled in run blocking. I was hoping that he would kind of take over where you saw him go in 2023, and maybe losing Carmen Brasilla was a big knock, and it probably was. James Craig was really bad. Munford, though, also allowed 5 sacks last season. And if he's your 9th, maybe your 8th offensive lineman, somebody that gives you a little offensive tackle, offensive guard flexibility, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that you could do. But at the same time, if you told me the Raiders had to move on from Munford to go out and add a vet that's going to be able to help them contribute right away, I would say, okay, that makes a little bit of sense to me. Let's go to another player here that's not a part of this regime. In fact, he was a part of the Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler regime, and that's Chris Smith, safety out of Georgia. And at $100.09 million, this one is a little bit of a risk to me, and I say that because at this current moment that I'm making this video, I don't really think it makes a lot of sense to cut Chris Smith because Isaiah Paul-Mal, Marcus Epps, and Trevon Merrick are all free agents. On top of that, Trey Taylor, he's unproven. It was a 7th rounder last season. Sure, he was the Jim Thorpe Award winner, but still very unproven. You could save over $1 million, so maybe that's something that this team needs to do, thinks about doing. But for the 5th rounder that was drafted, I want to say 170 overall back in 2023, he's really just a special teams player. Though, dude does love football, so maybe that keeps him around. Let's go to the final guy here, and this one, again, is kind of a huge kick in my you-know-what. When I started this show off, I talked about players that I'm excited to cut. Gardner Minshew, deuces. And then players I talked about that I didn't really want to cut. And these are kind of the names up here, but I wanted to try to at least throw out at least 6 names so you could think about where the Raiders could go. Dylan Laube, the 6th-rounder, small school kid from New Hampshire, if you cut him, it's only going to save $882K. They're not going to do it post-June 1st. They're just going to do it outright. And the reason why that I believe they're going to move on from Laube is because in the limited sample sizes that we saw, he was a disaster in the beginning of the year, and you could see at the end they started to give him a little bit more work, but I almost wonder if that was simply just because they didn't have any other running backs on their roster. If the Raiders want to keep him for special teams and special teams only, I'm okay with it, but at the end of the day, if you told me right now, is he a top 53 player to make this roster, I would say no. If you told me right now, is he good enough to be on the Raiders practice squad, I would say that's probably what he's hoping for, best case scenario, because he is a very well-liked dude in that locker room. So if you could pick only one, we just talked about Munford, Chris Smith, and Dylan Laube. All 3 of these players are guys that I could see the Raiders keeping and putting them on the back end kind of for depth. I could also see them potentially trying to move on from them and saving a little bit of money. I'm going to give you my answer after this YouTube ad break, but let me know if you could only keep one out of Thayer Munford, Chris Smith, or Dylan Laube. Let me know down below which name you would go with. The name that I would end up keeping here is actually Thayer Munford, which might surprise some people. Based on everything that I just said, some people thought maybe I was going to go with Chris Smith. But offensive line is just way, way more important, and you get exposed quicker when you have really bad offensive linemen out there playing, especially like if we got to a point where Munford got hurt and then we're looking for even more scraps, that would be a huge, bigger of a difference than if somebody like Chris Smith was out there playing. So to me, if I could keep only one of those names, I would end up keeping Thayer Munford. Also, when you're going over the cap or SPO track, you're going to see a lot of other contracts out there that the Raiders could technically cut and save, all the money to that contract, and it's a $0 dead cap hit. But I do think it's important to know that there has already been 14 players that the Raiders signed to reserve/future contracts. These are typically the dudes that the Silver and Black want to be able to put on the roster for more of like their practice squad in the offseason, if you will. They have 7 players on defense, which I would say most notably on this list is David Agoha, the International Pathway Program player. He's just going to keep making the roster because he doesn't count against the initial 53 or the 90-man roster, which will happen in this offseason. MJ Devonshire was a 7th-round pick last season from Pitt. And then Keenan Isaac was another dude that I really liked in terms of a waiver period player last August when I want to say he ended up being cut from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So it could be something to watch because I think also he was claimed by the Panthers. But now, obviously with us, on the offensive side of the football, the names that I would say the nation is going to go to right away, Dalton Wagner, 6'8" offensive tackle from Arkansas. I want to see what he can do. Tyreek McAllister, he ended up making that 53-man roster. Christian Wilkins ended up making the roster. Isaiah Spiller is a fun little running back that I can remember in college. But if you're wondering who made these decisions and when did they make these decisions, a lot of these decisions were made in early January by Champ Kelly because he was the one that was allowed to make these decisions going forward. So he's still on the roster, he's still on the staff, and so are these 14 players. And I don't think that the Raiders are going to cut them because they just gave him a brand new contract less than a month ago. Here's the thing. I've done this show long enough, and I know that even though I gave you a bunch of names, I gave you 6, I'm going to get a few people that tell me, Mitch, how'd you forget this guy? Mitch, how'd you forget this guy? That's okay. If you made it this far in the video, I want to know who I left off my potential Raiders 2025 cut candidates video.